The deafening blast of a car horn pierced the tranquility of Oakwood Avenue. A sleek midnight blue Aston Martin worth more than the annual salary of everyone on the street combined swerved around a delivery truck, narrowly missing an elderly woman crossing with her walker. "Get a driver's license, Grandma," shouted Alexander Sterling, 32-year-old tech mogul and self-proclaimed disruptor of the financial industry, as he gunned the engine. His Italian leather-gloved hands gripped the steering wheel while his custom Tom Ford sunglasses reflected the morning sun. The world was his racetrack and everyone else merely obstacles. 2 blocks away, Sophia Menddees was having the worst morning of her life. The 28-year-old community center director had just received notice that funding for her after-school arts program had been cut again, the 3rd time this year. "How am I supposed to tell the kid?" she muttered, clutching the letter as she walked briskly down the sidewalk. Her dark curls bounced with each determined step, her worn leather messenger bag slapping against her hip. 3 months of work, all those grand applications. The sound of squealing tires made her look up just in time to see the Aston Martin blast through a puddle, sending a wave of dirty water over her white blouse and jeans. Sophia stood frozen, mouth agape, as the luxury car stopped at a red light just ahead. Through the open window, she could see the driver laughing into his Bluetooth earpiece, completely oblivious to what he'd done. Something snapped inside her. The constant struggle to keep her community programs alive while the wealthy cruised by without a care. It was too much. Sophia looked down at the sidewalk, spotted a small rock, and before her rational brain could intervene, her fingers closed around it. "Hey," she shouted, marching toward the car. Alexander was in the middle of closing a 7-figure deal when he heard the shout. Annoyed at the interruption, he glanced in his rearview mirror to see a woman, soaking wet and looking positively feral, approaching his car. "Listen, Richards, I'm going to have to call you back," he said into his earpiece. "Some crazy person." Is the sound of stone meeting metal was like a gunshot. Alexander watched in horror as a small rock bounced off his pristine car door, leaving a dent the size of a quarter. "Are you insane?" he bellowed, throwing open his car door and stepping out. "Traffic laws be damned. Do you have any idea how much this car costs?" Sophia stood her ground, chest heaving. "Do you have any idea how much this blouse cost? Not that you care about anyone but yourself. You threw a rock at my car." Alexander's voice rose in octave, his perfectly coiffed hair falling slightly out of place as he gesticulated wildly. "That's vandalism. That's a crime. So is assault," Sophia countered, gesturing to her soaked clothes. "And being a complete jerk should be one too." A crowd was gathering, smartphones recording what was quickly becoming the neighborhood's entertainment for the day. Alexander noticed and immediately straightened his Italian silk tie. Public image was everything in his world. "I'm calling the police," he said, pulling out his phone. Sophia snorted. "Go ahead. I'd love to explain to them how the famous Alexander Sterling, yes, I recognize you from those pretentious billboards, drives like he owns the road." Alexander froze. She knew who he was. This was getting worse by the second. The last thing he needed was social media footage of him arguing with a dripping wet woman on a street corner. His board members would have a field day. "Fine," he said through gritted teeth, lowering his phone. "What do you want?" "Money for your clothes." Sophia's eyes narrowed dangerously. "Unlike you, I can't be bought. I want an apology." "An apology?" Alexander repeated as if she'd asked him to donate a kidney. "For what?" "For driving like a maniac. For splashing me. For being a perfect example of everything wrong with the privileged elite." Their standoff was interrupted by the blast of a horn. The light had turned green and traffic was backing up behind Alexander's abandoned Aston Martin. "This isn't over," Alexander warned, stepping back toward his car. "You're right about that," Sophia called after him, already planning to report his reckless driving. Neither of them noticed the sleek black Bentley parked across the street, nor the elderly woman with a cane watching the entire exchange with surprising interest through the tinted windows. Well, Madame Eleanor Sterling murmured to her driver. "I believe we found the perfect match for my impossible grandson. Make a note of that young woman's face. I want to know everything about her by dinner." Little did Sophia know that throwing that rock would set in motion a chain of events that would change her life forever. And little did Alexander realize that his grandmother, the formidable matriarch who controlled the family fortune, had just witnessed his embarrassing public display and was already formulating a plan that would horrify him. The rock had been thrown, and there was no going back. The Sterling family mansion stood like an ancient fortress on the highest hill overlooking the city. Built 3 generations ago when the Sterlings first struck oil, it remained a symbol of old money and influence that even Alexander's tech billions couldn't overshadow. Alexander stormed through the grand entrance, still seething from the morning's confrontation. The quarter-sized dent in his Aston Martin felt like a personal attack on everything he'd built. "Mr. Sterling, your grandmother has requested your presence in the East drawing room," announced Graves, the family butler who had served the Sterlings since Alexander was in diapers. Alexander checked his watch. A limited edition timepiece worth more than most people's homes. "Now I have a video conference in 20 minutes. Madame Sterling was quite insistent, sir," Graves replied with practiced neutrality. She mentioned something about the future of Sterling Enterprises that got Alexander's attention. His grandmother, Eleanor Sterling, may have been 82 years old, but she still controlled 51% of the family business. When she mentioned the company's future, even Alexander knew better than to ignore the summons. The East drawing room was Elena's domain, a space unchanged since the 1960s, filled with priceless antiques and family portraits of stern-looking Sterlings. Eleanor sat in her favorite wing-back chair, ramrod straight despite her age, silver hair perfectly coiffed. "Alexander," she said without looking up from her tablet, one of her few concessions to modern technology. "You're late." "I'm actually early for once, grandmother," he replied, bending to kiss her papery cheek. "What's so urgent about the company?" Eleanor set down her tablet and fixed her grandson with a penetrating stare. "The company is fine. It's you I'm concerned about." Alexander stiffened. "Me? My division posted record profits last quarter, and your public behavior posted record lows," Eleanor countered, tapping a manicured finger on her tablet. Like this morning's spectacle, with horrifying clarity, Alexander realized what his grandmother was referring to. "You saw that? The whole internet is about to see it," Eleanor said, turning her tablet to show Alexander a social media post. Tech billionaire Alexander Sterling freaks out over dented car while drenching innocent pedestrian. The video had already garnered thousands of views. Alexander's stomach dropped. "That woman threw a rock at my car after you soaked her clothes and nearly ran over an elderly woman, who by the way happens to be on the board of the Westfield Foundation." Alexander pinched the bridge of his nose. The Westfield Foundation was one of Sterling Enterprises' biggest charitable partners. "I'll have PR handle it. You can't handle your way out of who you've become, Alexander," Eleanor said, her voice softening slightly. "Your grandfather and I didn't build this company so our grandson could become another entitled rich man who thinks the world exists to serve him. I've tripled our tech division's value." Alexander defended himself and lost yourself in the process. Eleanor sighed. "You know the conditions of your grandfather's will. On your 33rd birthday, 3 months from now, you'll either take control of the company as a married man or your cousin Richard will assume the position." Alexander scoffed. "That archaic clause, it's not legally enforceable in this century." "It is when I control the board," Eleanor said simply. "Your grandfather believed a man needed a partner to ground him before he could lead effectively. I'm inclined to agree given your recent behavior. So what? You expect me to find a wife in 3 months? This isn't the 1800s, grandmother." Eleanor's lips curled into a smile that made Alexander instantly wary. "As a matter of fact, I've already found one for you." Across town, Sophia Menddees was trying to salvage what remained of her day. After changing into spare clothes she kept at the community center, she threw herself into work, determined not to let Alexander Sterling ruin her mood further. "Miss Menddees, there's someone here to see you," said Thomas, the teenage volunteer who helped at the front desk after school. Sophia looked up from the grant application she was rewriting. "I don't have any appointments this afternoon. She says it's important, something about funding." Thomas whispered the last word like it was sacred. Sophia's heart skipped. Funding was exactly what they needed. Send them in. She wasn't prepared for the elegant elderly woman who entered her office, supported by an ornate cane that probably cost more than Sophia's monthly rent. Miss Menddees, Eleanor Sterling. The woman extended her hand. I believe you've already met my grandson. Sophia's blood ran cold as recognition dawned. Sterling, as in Alexander Sterling, the very same, Eleanor confirmed, settling into the chair across from Sophia's desk without waiting for an invitation. I witnessed your encounter with him this morning. Sophia's professional demeanor crumbled. Mrs. Sterling, I can explain about the rock. Eleanor waved away her concern. Please, if more people stood up to him, perhaps he wouldn't be such a terror. And it's Madame Sterling, dear. Thoroughly confused, Sophia nodded. Madame Sterling, what can I do for you? It's what I can do for you, Miss Menddees. Eleanor placed a leather portfolio on Sophia's cluttered desk. Inside, you'll find details of a grant for $5 million to your community center, renewable annually for the next decade. Sophia's jaw dropped. She'd been fighting for scraps of funding for years, and now this woman was casually offering her more money than she'd ever imagined. That's incredibly generous, but I don't understand. There is, of course, a condition, Eleanor continued, her eyes twinkling with something that made Sophia instantly suspicious. What kind of condition? Sophia asked cautiously. You'll marry my grandson within the month. Sophia stared at the elderly woman, waiting for the punchline. When none came, she burst into nervous laughter. That's a good one. Did Javier put you up to this? It's not even April Fool's Day. Eleanor didn't crack a smile. I assure you, Miss Menddees, this is no joke. My grandson needs to be married before his 33rd birthday to assume control of our company. You need funding for your admirable community programs. I'm proposing a mutually beneficial arrangement. Sophia's laughter died. You're serious? Perfectly. But why me? Your grandson and I despise each other. We just met this morning when I threw a rock at his car. Precisely, Eleanor said with satisfaction. You're the first woman I've seen stand up to him in years. Everyone else either fears his money or wants it. You, Miss Menddees, did neither. Sophia stood up, pacing her small office. This is insane. People don't arrange marriages anymore, especially between complete strangers who can't stand each other. It would only be for 1 year. Eleanor continued as if Sophia hadn't spoken. After that, you can quietly divorce. You'll keep the grant funding regardless, and Alexander will maintain control of the company. Sophia stopped pacing. 1 year of my life married to the most arrogant man I've ever met. In exchange for securing my community center's future for a decade. Think of all the children you could help, Eleanor said softly. The programs you could fund, the difference you could make. Sophia's mind raced. This was madness. Yet, the rational part of her brain couldn't help calculating how many lives could be changed with that kind of money. The after-school programs could expand. They could hire actual staff instead of relying on volunteers. They could renovate the crumbling building. Does your grandson know about this ridiculous plan? Sophia finally asked. Eleanor's smile widened. He's being informed as we speak. Back at the Sterling mansion, Alexander was having an aneurysm. You want me to what? Lower your voice, Alexander. I raised you better than that. Eleanor chided. You expect me to marry the crazy woman who vandalized my car this morning? Alexander ran his hands through his perfect hair, destroying hours of his stylist's work. Have you lost your mind? On the contrary, I found the perfect solution to our predicament. Eleanor stood, moving with surprising agility for her age. Sophia Menddees runs a community center that serves underprivileged youth. Exactly the kind of connection the Sterling Foundation needs to improve our public image after your recent escapades. So hire her as a consultant. Don't marry me off to her like some medieval princess. The board meeting is tomorrow morning. I expect you to announce your engagement. Eleanor headed for the door, then paused. Oh, and she'll be joining us for dinner tonight. 8-0. Don't be late. Alexander stood dumbfounded in the center of the room as his grandmother departed. Sir Graves appeared in the doorway. Shall I lay out your dinner jacket for this evening? Alexander grabbed the nearest object, a priceless Ming Dynasty vase, and for one wild moment considered hurling it across the room. Then he remembered the last time he'd damaged a family heirloom and the month he'd spent cut off from his trust fund. He carefully set the vase down. Yes, Graves and a double whiskey. Now, as Eleanor's chauffeur drove her back to the mansion, she allowed herself a satisfied smile. Phase 1 of her plan was complete. Sophia hadn't said yes, but she hadn't said no either. And Alexander, for all his bluster, would never risk losing the company to his cousin Richard. Sometimes, Elena murmured to herself, the young need a little push in the right direction. The chauffeur, accustomed to his employer's cryptic statements, simply nodded in the rear-view mirror. James, Elena said suddenly. Does the chef know we'll have a guest for dinner? Yes, madame. And the blue guest suite has been prepared as you requested. Elena nodded approvingly. Excellent. I have a feeling Miss Menddees might need to stay overnight after she and Alexander discussed terms. In her tiny apartment, Sophia stared at the business card Elena had left her. On the back, the elegant woman had written an address and dinner 8:00 p.m. This is insane, Sophia told her cat, Fred. Completely insane. Fred meowed in what seemed like agreement. Yet Sophia found herself opening her closet, pushing aside her practical work clothes to find the one cocktail dress she owned. A deep green number she'd bought on sale for her college roommate's wedding 3 years ago. I'm just going to tell them no in person, she justified to the cat. It's the polite thing to do. Fred's judgmental stare suggested she didn't believe that for a second. Sophia's Uber pulled up to the Sterling Mansion gates at precisely 30 p.m. She sat frozen in the back seat, suddenly questioning every life decision that had led her to this moment. This is it, right? The driver asked, eyeing the imposing wrought-iron gates with visible intimidation. Apparently, Sophia muttered, clutching her worn leather purse like a shield. She'd spent the afternoon researching Alexander Sterling Tech, wonderkind, notorious playboy, and according to several scathing articles, corporate America's favorite enfant terrible. Nothing she'd read had improved her opinion of him. The gates swung open automatically, and the Uber crept up the winding driveway. Sophia's stomach twisted into increasingly complex knots as the mansion came into view. A sprawling architectural masterpiece that made her feel even more out of place in her 3-year-old dress and department store heels. Good luck in there, the driver said as she stepped out. Looks like the kind of place that eats people like us for appetizers. Thanks for the pep talk, Sophia replied dryly, but tipped him well anyway. She'd barely reached the massive front door when it swung open, revealing the butler who'd accompanied Elena to the community center. Miss Menddees, welcome to Sterling Manor, he said with a slight bow. I'm Graves. Madame Sterling is expecting you in the main parlor. Sophia followed him through a foyer larger than her entire apartment, past priceless artwork and antiques that probably cost more than her annual salary. Each step on the marble floor echoed like a countdown to disaster. Miss Sophia Menddees, Graves announced as they entered a lavishly decorated room where Eleanor sat regally on a velvet settee. Ah, Sophia, right on time, Eleanor said warmly, extending her hand. Punctuality, another excellent quality Alexander could learn from you. Where is Mr. Sterling? Sophia asked, glancing around nervously. Making an entrance, no doubt, Eleanor said with a hint of disapproval. Whiskey Graves for our guest. Actually, I'd prefer, Sophia began. Nonsense, dear. You'll need it, Eleanor interrupted, patting the seat beside her. Now, before my grandson arrives, let's establish some ground rules for this arrangement. Sophia perched awkwardly on the edge of the settee. Madame Sterling, I haven't agreed to anything yet, but you're here, Elena pointed out with a triumphant smile, which means you're considering it. Before Sophia could argue, the parlor doors burst open and Alexander stormed in, looking like he just stepped off the cover of GQ. Perfectly tailored dinner jacket, hair artfully tousled, and an expression of barely contained fury. Grandmother, this has gone far enough, he began, then stopped short when he spotted Sophia. His eyes narrowed. You actually came, Mr. Sterling, Sophia acknowledged coolly, accepting the whiskey Graves offered and taking a fortifying sip that burned all the way down. Please, if we're to be engaged, you should call him Alexander, Elena said cheerfully, clearly enjoying the tension crackling between them. "We are not getting engaged," Alexander growled, striding to the bar cart and pouring himself a generous drink. "This entire scheme is ludicrous. Is that what we're calling legally binding corporate bylaws these days?" "Ludicrous?" Eleanor asked innocently. "And what about you, Miss Menddees? Do you find $5 million for your community center equally ludicrous?" Alexander choked. "Zip. $5 million? Are you out of your mind?" Sophia straightened her spine, finding her courage. "For the record, I also think this is completely insane. But unlike Mr. Sterling, I'm willing to at least discuss it for the sake of the 300 children who depend on our programs." "How noble," Alexander drawled sarcastically. "Willing to sell yourself into marriage for the greater good." Sophia's eyes flashed dangerously. "Better than selling my soul for a corner office and a car that costs more than most people make in a decade." "Dinner is served," Graves announced from the doorway, providing a timely interruption before either could escalate further. The dining room was straight out of downtown Abbey, crystal chandeliers, hand-painted china, and enough silverware to confuse a culinary school graduate. Sophia discreetly watched Eleanor to figure out which fork to us for each course. "So," Alexander Eleanor began conversationally as the first course was served. "Sophia runs the West Side Community Center. Their after-school arts program recently lost its funding." "Fascinating," Alexander replied, not bothering to look up from his plate. Sophia took another sip of wine. "It actually is fascinating if you care about children having safe places to go after school instead of empty apartments or street corners. And I suppose you're going to tell me that's my responsibility somehow," Alexander challenged. "Not everything is about you, Mr. Sterling," Sophia shot back. "Though I'm learning that's a difficult concept for you to grasp." Eleanor beamed between them like a tennis fan at an especially thrilling match. "This is precisely why you're perfect for each other. Sophia doesn't hesitate to put you in your place, Alexander. Perfect for each other." Alexander scoffed. "Grandmother, she threw a rock at my car, and I'd do it again," Sophia muttered into her wine glass. Alexander glared at her. "See violent tendencies, hardly wife material." "Oh, please." Sophia rolled her eyes. "It was a pebble, not a boulder. Your fragile masculinity suffered more damage than your precious car." "My what? Besides," Sophia continued, warming to her subject, "I'm no more interested in being your wife than you are in being my husband. But unlike you, I'm willing to make sacrifices for something bigger than myself." A heavy silence fell over the table. Eleanor watched her grandson's face carefully. For the first time that evening, Alexander seemed to be at a loss for words. The arrangement would be for 1 year only, Eleanor reminded them both. A business transaction essentially. Sophia gets the funding her center desperately needs, and you, Alexander, get control of the company instead of your cousin, Richard. Alexander's jaw tightened at the mention of his cousin. Richard couldn't run a lemonade stand, much less Sterling Enterprises. "Then perhaps you should consider Miss Menddees' proposal more seriously," Eleanor suggested. "It's your proposal, grandmother, not hers," Alexander pointed out. Sophia set down her fork. "Actually, if we're negotiating terms, I have some conditions of my own." Both Sterlings turned to look at her with surprise. "Conditions?" Alexander repeated incredulously. "You're hardly in a position to one?" Sophia interrupted, counting on her fingers. "The funding comes with no strings attached beyond the marriage. The community center's programs remain under my complete control." Eleanor nodded. "Naturally, too, we live separately. I keep my apartment." Alexander snorted gladly. 3. Sophia continued, her courage building. "In public, we maintain a respectful, convincing relationship. No embarrassing me, no public arguments, no obvious signs that this is a sham." "Fine," Alexander conceded. "But that goes both ways. No rock-throwing incidents or public accusations about my fragile masculinity." 4. Sophia pressed on. "The marriage remains strictly professional. No physical expectations." Alexander nearly spat out his wine. "Trust me, that won't be a problem." And 5. Sophia concluded, meeting Alexander's gaze steadily. "You agreed to volunteer at the community center once a week during our arrangement." This time, Alexander did choke on his drink. Absolutely not, Alexander. Elena chided. It's an excellent opportunity to improve your public image after that unfortunate incident with the swimsuit models and the yacht in Monaco. Sophia raised an eyebrow and Alexander had the grace to look slightly embarrassed. Fine, he grumbled. 1 hour a week, no more. 3 hours, Sophia countered. And you actually have to participate, not just stand around looking pretty. You think I'm pretty? Alexander smirked. Sophia ignored the bait. Do we have a deal? Alexander studied her across the table, his expression inscrutable. You drive a hard bargain for someone who threw a rock at my car this morning. Life comes at you fast, Sophia replied without missing a beat. The corner of Alexander's mouth twitched. Almost, but not quite, forming a smile. 1 year, no physical relationship, 3 hours a week at your little community center, and we convince the world we're madly in love. Just like a fairy tale, Sophia said with saccharine sweetness. Well then, Eleanor clasped her hands together in delight. I believe we have an engagement. Graves, the champagne, please. As Graves appeared with an ice bucket containing what was undoubtedly obscenely expensive champagne, Alexander leaned across the table toward Sophia. You realize you're making a deal with the devil, right? He murmured. Sophia met his gaze unflinchingly. No, Mr. Sterling. The devil is making a deal with me. For the first time that evening, Alexander's smile seemed genuine. The rest of dinner passed in a whirlwind of details and planning. Eleanor, it seemed, had thought of everything, from the strategic press release announcing their whirlwind romance to the carefully selected engagement ring, vintage, from the Sterling family collection, to the intimate wedding ceremony scheduled for exactly 3 weeks later. 3 weeks, Sophia protested. That's impossible. Nothing is impossible with enough money, dear, Eleanor assured her. Besides, we need to ensure Alexander assumes control before his birthday. By the time dessert arrived, Sophia's head was spinning, and not just from the champagne. She had somehow agreed to marry a man she had met that morning when she threw a rock at his car. A man who represented everything she despised about wealth inequality. A man who was currently arguing with his grandmother about the guest list for their wedding. I think I need some air, Sophia announced, rising from the table. The garden is lovely this time of evening, Elena suggested. Alexander, why don't you show Sophia the roses? It wasn't really a suggestion. Reluctantly, Alexander stood and gestured for Sophia to follow him. The Sterling garden was indeed spectacular. A meticulously landscaped paradise with stone pathways, winding through blooming flowers, elegant fountains, and perfectly trimmed hedges. Under different circumstances, Sophia might have been enchanted. Your grandmother is a force of nature, she observed as they walked side by side down a moonlit path. Alexander's laugh was unexpectedly warm. That's putting it mildly. Eleanor Sterling once made the CEO of a multinational corporation cry during a board meeting. The man was 62. They reached a stone bench beside a reflecting pool. Sophia sat down, suddenly aware of how exhausted she felt. Are we really going to do this? She asked quietly. Alexander remained standing, hands in his pockets, staring at the water. It appears we don't have much choice. I need the company, and you need the money. Not for me, Sophia felt compelled to clarify. For the center. Yes, you've made your selflessness abundantly clear, Alexander said dryly, but without the earlier venom. A comfortable silence fell between them. The first moment all day that hadn't been filled with tension or animosity. For what it's worth, Alexander said finally. I am sorry about splashing you this morning. Sophia looked up in surprise. Did the great Alexander Sterling just apologize to a mere mortal? Don't get used to it, he warned. But there was a hint of humor in his voice. A shooting star streaked across the sky above them, and Sophia felt a strange twist in her stomach that she quickly attributed to too much rich food and champagne. We should head back, Alexander said, offering his hand to help her up. Sophia hesitated before taking it, noticing for the first time how warm his palm felt against hers, how easily her small hand disappeared into his larger one. 1 year, she reminded herself as much as him. We just need to survive 1 year. Alexander's expression was unreadable in the moonlight. 1 year, he agreed. How hard can it be? As they walked back toward the mansion, Neither mentioned that they were still holding hands. Tech billionaire Alexander Sterling engaged a community activist, a modern fairy tale. The headlines screamed from every gossip site and business publication in the country. Sophia stared at her phone in disbelief, scrolling through article after article, analyzing her whirlwind romance with Alexander. "They're calling me the Cinderella of Silicon Valley," she groaned, dropping her head onto her desk at the community center. "There's even a hashtag Sterling Cinderella." Her assistant director, Javier, peered over her shoulder at the phone screen. "Could be worse. At least they're not calling you the woman who threw a rock at his car." "That was 3 days ago," Sophia muttered. "How is this my life now?" According to Eleanor Sterling's meticulously orchestrated press release, Alexander and Sophia had been secretly dating for months after meeting at a charity gala. Their engagement was the culmination of a passionate romance kept private until now. The good news, Javier pointed out, is that donations to the center have tripled since the announcement. "Apparently, everyone wants to support the charity of the future, Mr. Sterling." Sophia winced at the title. "Don't call me that. Better get used to it," Javier warned just as Sophia's phone buzzed with a text message. "Alexander car outside in 10. Grandmother insists on engagement photos at the park. Wear something approachable but elegant." "Her words, not mine," Sophia texted back. "I'm working. Some of us have actual jobs, Alexander. And some of us have grandmothers who can single-handedly destroy both our futures if we don't cooperate." 10 minutes. "I have to go," Sophia told Javier, grabbing her purse. "Apparently, I need to look approachable but elegant for engagement photos." "Hold up," Javier said, blocking her exit. "You can't go like that." Sophia glanced down at her practical blouse and slacks. "What's wrong with this?" Javier disappeared into the storage closet and emerged with a garment. "But the Eleanor Sterling Foundation delivered this morning with instructions that you wear it for the photos. They sent me clothes." Sophia's voice rose an octave like I'm some kind of dress-up doll. Nevertheless, curiosity got the better of her. Inside the garment bag was a simple but beautifully cut sundress in a deep teal that somehow matched her eyes perfectly. "It's actually nice," she admitted reluctantly. 15 minutes later, Sophia emerged from the community center to find not just a car, but Alexander himself leaning against a sleek silver Bentley, looking infuriatingly handsome in casual designer clothes that probably cost more than her monthly rent. "You're late," he said by way of greeting, then paused as he took in her appearance. "You look different." "Your grandmother sent the dress," Sophia explained, feeling suddenly self-conscious. Alexander nodded. "She's thorough and usually right, though I'd never tell her that." He opened the passenger door for her, a gesture that seemed surprisingly gentlemanly for someone she still considered an entitled jerk. "No driver today?" Sophia asked as Alexander slid into the seat beside her. "I thought we should have a chance to get our stories straight before facing the photographers," he explained, pulling smoothly into traffic. "According to social media, we are madly in love after meeting at the governor's charity ball 6 months ago." "But I wasn't at the governor's charity ball," Sophia pointed out. "Doesn't matter. Nobody fact-checks these things," Alexander said with the confidence of someone who had managed public narratives his entire life. "We need to agree on basic details. How I proposed, our favorite date spots, why we kept it secret." Sophia turned in her seat to face him. "Why did we keep it secret?" Alexander considered this as he navigated through downtown traffic. "Because you were worried about how your relationship with a capitalist overlord. Your words, I'm sure, would affect your credibility in the community activism world." Despite herself, Sophia laughed. "That's actually plausible. I do occasionally have good ideas," Alexander said dryly. "It's how I made my first billion." "And here, I thought you just inherited everything," Sophia remarked. Alexander's knuckles whitened slightly on the steering wheel. "I built Sterling Tech from scratch. Grandmother funded the seed round, but every dollar since then I earned myself." Sophia heard the pride in his voice and filed this information away. Apparently, Alexander Sterling didn't like having his accomplishments dismissed anymore. Then she did. "So, how did you propose?" she asked, changing the subject. "Private chef, string quartet, rose petals." "The standard billionaire proposal package," Alexander suggested. Sophia shook her head. Too cliché. Nobody would believe I'd say yes to something that impersonal. Alexander glanced at her with genuine curiosity. What would you say yes to? The question caught Sophia off guard. Something thoughtful. Something that showed you actually knew me. Not just what expensive things you thought might impress me. A strange expression crossed Alexander's face. Something almost like intrigue. Before he could respond, they arrived at the park where a small crew of photographers was already waiting. Ready to be madly in love, Miss Menddees? Alexander asked, cutting the engine. Sophia took a deep breath. As ready as I'll ever be, Mr. Sterling. Alexander reached across to the glove compartment and pulled out a small velvet box. Almost forgot the most important prop, the ring. Inside was not what Sophia had expected. Rather than an ostentatious diamond that would look ridiculous on her hand, it was a delicate vintage piece, an emerald surrounded by tiny diamonds in an intricate platinum setting. It was my grandmother's, Alexander explained as he slipped it onto her finger. She insisted. It's beautiful, Sophia admitted, surprised by how perfectly it fit. Don't get attached, Alexander warned. It goes back in the family vault in a year. The moment they stepped out of the car, they were swarmed by photographers. Alexander immediately transformed, his arm wrapping protectively around Sophia's waist, his expression softening as he looked down at her with what appeared to be genuine adoration. Mr. Sterling, Sophia, over here. When's the wedding? Show us the ring. Alexander handled the photographers with practiced ease, keeping Sophia close to his side as they posed for pictures beside a flowering cherry tree on a park bench and strolling hand in hand along a picturesque path. Beautiful. Now kiss her, Alexander, one photographer called out. Sophia tensed, but Alexander smoothly deflected. My fiancé isn't a performing seal, he said with a charming but firm smile. We'll save our private moments for ourselves if you don't mind. Sophia shot him a grateful look, which he acknowledged with a subtle nod. You two make such an unlikely couple, a journalist from Vanity Fair commented. The tech billionaire and the community activist. What brought you together? Alexander squeezed Sophia's hand, a signal for her to take this one. Sometimes the heart wants what it wants, Sophia said, surprising herself with how smoothly the lie came. Beyond our professional differences, we found we share many of the same values. Like what? The journalist pressed. Sophia thought quickly. We both believe in the power of education to transform lives. We just approached it from different angles. Me through direct community work and Alexander through technology. Alexander looked at her with what appeared to be genuine surprise before adding, Sophia helped me see that true impact happens at the community level, and I hope I've shown her that when properly directed, corporate resources can amplify that impact. Their answers seemed to satisfy the press, and soon the photo session was wrapping up. As the last photographers packed away their equipment, Sophia released a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. You're good at this, Alexander noted as they walked back to the car. At lying, you mean. At finding the thread of truth in the narrative, he corrected. It's a valuable skill. Back in the car, Alexander checked his watch. We have reservations at La Mer in half an hour. Grandmother's orders. Our first public dinner as an engaged couple. Sophia groaned. Can't we just get drive-through and call it a day? I'm exhausted from all this fake smiling. To her surprise, Alexander hesitated. You know what? Why not? 20 minutes later, they were parked at a scenic overlook above the city, eating burgers and fries from a local drive-through. Eleanor Sterling would have a stroke if she could see us now, Alexander said, dipping a fry into Sophia's milkshake. Hey, Sophia protested. Get your own. Sharing is caring, darling, Alexander teased, adopting the syrupy tone he'd used for the photographers. Sophia rolled her eyes, but found herself smiling despite her best efforts. In the golden light of the setting sun, with his tie loosened and a spot of ketchup on his designer shirt, Alexander looked almost normal, almost likable. So she said, stealing one of his fries in retaliation, Tell me something true about the real Alexander Sterling, not the version in the press releases. Alexander considered this while chewing. I hate caviar, he finally admitted. Everyone expects me to love it because it's expensive, but it tastes like salty fish goo, Sophia laughed. That's your deep dark secret, your caviar aversion. Your turn, Alexander countered. Something true about Sophia Menddees. Sophia thought for a moment. I wanted to be a ballerina when I was little. I took lessons at the community center where I now work. That's why I fought so hard to keep the arts programs when the funding was cut. Alexander studied her with unexpected intensity. You never pursued it professionally. Not everyone has the luxury of following childhood dreams, Sophia said more sharply than she'd intended. Some of us have to deal with reality. An awkward silence fell between them. Alexander wadded up his burger wrapper and tossed it precisely into the takeout bag. We should head to La Mer, he said, his voice returning to its usual business-like tone. We've kept up appearances enough for today. The brief moment of connection vanished as quickly as it had appeared. By the time they reached the restaurant, they were back to being what they truly were. Two strangers bound by a business arrangement, playing roles for the benefit of others. The maitre greeted them effusively, escorting them to the best table with a view of both the restaurant to be seen and the bay for ambience. Alexander ordered champagne without consulting the wine list, clearly a regular customer. Two convincing performances, he said, raising his glass after the waiter departed. Sophia clinked her glass against his, and to getting what we both want. As they sipped their champagne, a distinguished older couple approached their table. Alexander, what a pleasant surprise, the man said, clapping Alexander on the shoulder. Alexander stood immediately, his posture stiffening. Senator Williams, Mrs. Williams, lovely to see you both. We read about your engagement, Mrs. Williams said, turning her attention to Sophia. You must be the lucky lady. Sophia forced a smile and extended her hand. Sophia Menddees, it's a pleasure to meet you. Sophia runs the Westside Community Center, Alexander added smoothly, placing his hand on the small of her back in a gesture that felt oddly protective. Her after-school programs have shown remarkable success rates in improving academic performance. Senator Williams looked impressed. Is that so? We're always looking for successful community initiatives to support. Perhaps we should talk sometime, Miss Menddees. Sophia blinked in surprise. I'd appreciate that very much, Senator. After exchanging a few more pleasantries, the Williams continued to their own table. Sophia turned to Alexander with a questioning look. You didn't have to do that, she said quietly. Do what? Talk about the community center. Get the senator interested. Alexander shrugged. It's good business. The Williams are influential with several foundations. Besides, your programs actually do have impressive outcomes. I looked into them. You researched my work. Sophia was genuinely surprised. Know thy enemy, Alexander said lightly, but there was no malice in his tone, or in this case, thy fiancé. The rest of dinner passed in a strange but not unpleasant mixture of genuine conversation and performance for the benefit of other diners who recognized them. By the time dessert arrived, Sophia found herself laughing at Alexander's surprisingly sharp observations about various tech industry personalities. You're not what I expected, she admitted as they waited for the valet to bring the car. Meaning you're still obnoxiously privileged, Sophia clarified, but slightly less insufferable than I originally thought. Alexander placed a hand over his heart in mock emotion. Be careful, Miss Menddees. That almost sounded like a compliment. The drive back to Sophia's apartment was quiet, both of them tired from a day of pretending. When Alexander pulled up outside her building, he surprised her by coming around to open her door. I can manage, Sophia protested. I'm sure you can, Alexander agreed. But there might be photographers. Better safe than sorry. He walked her to the entrance of her building, maintaining a respectful distance that nonetheless would look appropriately intimate to any lurking paparazzi. Thank you, Sophia said awkwardly when they reached the door, for not making this more difficult than it already is. Alexander studied her face in the dim light of the entrance. We're in this together, strange as that may be. See you tomorrow at the engagement party, Sophia groaned. Another event. Grandmother's orders. Alexander reminded her. Black tie, Sterling Manor, 80. I'll send a car. I can drive myself, Sophia insisted. In that death trap you call a car? I don't think so. You're a Sterling fiancé now. Appearances matter. Before Sophia could argue further, Alexander leaned down and brushed his lips against her cheek. A gesture clearly meant for any watching eyes, but one that sent an unexpected shiver down her spine. Nonetheless, "Good night, Sophia," he murmured close to her ear. "Good night, Alexander," she replied, hating the slight breathlessness in her voice. As she climbed the stairs to her apartment, Sophia touched the spot on her cheek where his lips had been. "It's all for show," she reminded herself firmly. "Don't forget what he really is." But as she drifted off to sleep that night, Sophia found herself remembering not the arrogant man who had splashed her with his car, but the unexpected glimpses of someone more complex. Someone who stole fries from her milkshake, researched her work, and kept his hand protectively at the small of her back when introducing her to a senator. Across town in his penthouse, Alexander Sterling stood on his balcony, nursing a whiskey and staring at the city lights. He told himself he was merely reviewing the day's performance, analyzing what had worked and what hadn't in their charade. He told himself that was why he kept recalling the sound of Sophia's genuine laughter, the surprising softness of her cheek beneath his lips, and the fierce intelligence in her eyes when she spoke about her work. It was just part of the act, he assured himself, just business. But for the first time in years, Alexander Sterling wasn't entirely convinced by his own lies. "You're getting married in 3 days," Javier said, eyeing Sophia over his coffee cup as they sat in her cramped office at the community center. "How are you so calm?" Sophia continued typing on her laptop, barely glancing up. "Because it's not a real marriage. Remember, just a business transaction with a really expensive party." It had been 2 weeks since the rock-throwing incident that had somehow led to her engagement to one of America's most eligible bachelors. 2 weeks of photo ops, social events, and carefully orchestrated public appearances that had transformed Sophia from an unknown community organizer to half of what the media was now calling America's most inspiring power couple. "Oh, please," Javier scoffed. "I saw those pictures from the charity gala. That man is not looking at you like it's a business transaction." Sophia's fingers paused over the keyboard. The charity gala had been unexpected. Alexander had been attentive, charming, and had even donated an additional $1 million to the children's hospital that was hosting the event. When she'd thanked him later, he shrugged it off with a casual, "It's a good cause." That had seemed genuinely sincere. "He's a good actor," Sophia said, as much to convince herself as Javier. "That's all." "Uh-huh," Javier replied skeptically. "Is that why you keep the society pages with your pictures pinned to your bulletin board?" Sophia threw a pen at him, which he dodged with practiced ease. "Speaking of your husband-to-be," Javier continued, "isn't today his first day volunteering here? As per your prenuptial agreement?" Sophia glanced at the clock and groaned. "I completely forgot. He'll be here in half an hour." The great Alexander Sterling folding chairs and serving snacks to after-school kids, Javier mused. "This I have to see." "Don't you have somewhere else to be?" Sophia asked pointedly. "Absolutely not." Javier grinned. "I cleared my entire schedule for this historic occasion, precisely on time." A commotion at the front of the building signaled Alexander's arrival. Sophia hurried to the entrance to find him surrounded by her staff, all trying not to look obviously starstruck. "Alexander," she greeted him suddenly, aware of her worn jeans and simple blouse compared to his perfectly tailored casual wear that probably cost more than a month's operating budget for the center. "Sophia," he replied with the warm smile he perfected for their public appearances. He leaned in to kiss her cheek, whispering, "There's a photographer across the street. Make it look good." Sophia plastered on her own smile, taking his hand. "Let me show you around." The community center was housed in a former elementary school built in the 1960s. Despite Sophia's best efforts and creative budgeting, the building showed its age, peeling paint, worn flooring, and outdated facilities throughout. "This is our main activity room," Sophia explained, leading Alexander into a large space where tables were set up for the after-school program. "Kids arrive in about an hour. We serve a healthy snack, provide homework help, and then offer various enrichment activities." Alexander surveyed the room with an unreadable expression. "How many children do you serve?" "About 60 each day with another 40 on the waiting list," Sophia answered. "With the Sterling Foundation grant, we're hoping to expand our capacity and improve the facilities." Alexander nodded, then surprised her by asking, What's the most immediate need? Sophia blinked, not expecting genuine interest. Well, the roof leaks when it rains. We've been using buckets, but it's getting worse. Alexander frowned, looking up at the ceiling where water stains marked previous leaks. That's unacceptable. Children should have a safe, dry space. Welcome to the reality of nonprofit work, Sophia said with a shrug that didn't quite hide her frustration. Everything's always make do and mend when you're constantly chasing funding. Before Alexander could respond, the front doors burst open and a group of teenagers spilled in laughing and talking loudly. They stopped short when they spotted Alexander. "Is that?" one girl whispered loudly. "It is," another confirmed, eyes wide. Sophia stepped forward. "Everyone, this is Alexander Sterling. He's going to be volunteering with us on Wednesday afternoons. Alexander, these are our teen mentors who help with the younger kids." A lanky boy of about 16 stepped forward. "You're the tech guy, right? The one who made that coding app?" Alexander looked momentarily surprised. "Yes, Codecraft was one of my first projects. I learned to code on that," the boy said, a hint of admiration in his voice. "I'm Miguel, by the way." Something shifted in Alexander's expression, a softening around the eyes that Sophia had rarely seen. "Nice to meet you, Miguel. Are you still coding?" "Trying to," Miguel shrugged. "The computers here are pretty ancient." Sophia felt a flash of embarrassment at the sense outdated technology, but Alexander just nodded thoughtfully. "Perhaps I can help with that," he said, then turned to Sophia. "What should I do first?" For the next 3 hours, Sophia watched in amazement as Alexander Sterling, billionaire tech mogul and notorious playboy, helped set up snack stations, assisted children with math homework, and even got down on the floor to help a group of 8-year-olds build a Lego robot. "He's actually good with them," Javier murmured to Sophia as they observed Alexander patiently explaining a math concept to a frustrated third grader. "I know," Sophia replied, unable to hide her surprise. "It's weird." When the last child had been picked up in the center was quiet again. Sophia found Alexander in the small room they used as a computer lab, examining the outdated equipment with a critical eye. "These machines are dinosaurs," he said without looking up. "How are kids supposed to learn relevant skills on technology that was obsolete 5 years ago?" Sophia leaned against the doorframe, crossing her arms defensively. "We work with what we have, Alexander. Not everyone has the luxury of the latest and greatest." Alexander straightened, running a hand through his hair. A gesture Sophia had come to recognize as a sign of genuine agitation rather than his carefully controlled public persona. "This isn't about luxury," he argued. "It's about giving these kids a fighting chance in a digital economy. Miguel has real talent. He could have a future in tech if he had the right tools and guidance." "You think I don't know that?" Sophia shot back, her voice rising slightly. "You think I wouldn't give these kids the moon if I could? We do the best we can with limited resources." Alexander studied her face for a long moment, then nodded as if coming to a decision. "I'll be back tomorrow." "Tomorrow?" "But our agreement was Wednesdays only," Sophia reminded him. "Some things can't wait until next week," Alexander said cryptically, already pulling out his phone and dialing. "I need to make some calls." The next morning, Sophia arrived at the center to find a delivery truck parked outside and a team of workers unloading brand new computers, tablets, and various pieces of equipment she didn't even recognize. "What's going on?" she demanded, spotting Alexander directing the installation like a general commanding troops. He turned to her with an expression of boyish excitement that momentarily took her breath away. "Technology upgrade. These are all last-generation models from Sterling. Tech perfectly good, but recently replaced in our offices. Instead of recycling them, I thought they could have a second life here." Sophia stood speechless as workers continued to stream past her carrying boxes. "And I've arranged for a roofing crew to come on Saturday," Alexander continued, mistaking her silence for approval. "They can fix the leaks and replace the damaged sections without disrupting your programs." "Alexander," Sophia finally managed, pulling him aside. "I appreciate the gesture, but this isn't what we agreed to. You can't just swoop in and what? Help?" Alexander challenged, his excitement fading to confusion. "Isn't that the whole point of your work here? Getting these kids what they need? Of course it is. But then what's the problem? Alexander spread his hands. This equipment was just gathering dust in a warehouse. The roofing crew was available. It's a win-win. Sophia struggled to articulate why his unilateral decision bothered her so much. The problem is that you didn't ask. You just decided what we needed and made it happen like some white knight. Alexander supplied a hint of his old sarcasm returning. Exactly, Sophia nodded. These kids don't need a savior who drops in with fancy gifts. They need sustainable support and people who see them as more than a charity case or a tax write-off. Alexander's expression hardened. Is that what you think this is? A tax write-off, isn't it? Sophia challenged. Another good deed for the Sterling family image. For a moment, raw hurt flashed across Alexander's face before his expression smoothed into the cool mask he wore at business functions. You know, for someone who preaches inclusion and giving people chances, you're remarkably quick to assume the worst of E. The accusation hit Sophia like a physical blow. Before she could respond, Miguel appeared at Alexander's elbow, eyes wide with excitement. Mr. Sterling, is it true you brought new computers and VR headsets and a 3D printer? Alexander's mask cracked slightly as he turned to the teenager. I did think you could help set them up. Miguel nodded enthusiastically. Absolutely. I've been reading about 3D printing for months. As Miguel dragged Alexander off to examine the new equipment, Sophia stood frozen, conflicting emotions washing over her. Part of her, the stubborn, independent part that had fought for everything she'd achieved, bristled at Alexander's high-handed approach to helping. But another part, the part that had lain awake at night worrying about the center's leaking roof and outdated facilities, couldn't deny the genuine joy on Miguel's face. By lunchtime, the computer lab had been transformed. The old, sluggish machines had been replaced with sleek, powerful workstations. A 3D printer hummed in the corner, creating a small robot designed by a group of enthralled middle schoolers. Alexander moved among them, answering questions and offering guidance with unexpected patience. Sophia watched from the doorway, her earlier anger fading as she observed the scene. Whatever his motivations, Alexander was making a real difference for these kids today. He's not what I expected, said a voice beside her. Sophia turned to find Mrs. Chen, their elderly math tutor who volunteered 3 days a week. No, Sophia admitted softly. He's not. When the excitement finally died down and the children reluctantly returned to their regular activities, Sophia found Alexander alone in the kitchenette making himself a cup of coffee. I should have consulted you first, he said without turning around. I apologize for overstepping. The simple admission caught Sophia off guard. Thank you, she replied, stepping further into the room. And I'm sorry for assuming your motives were less than genuine. Alexander turned to face her coffee mug in hand. Why did you? The question was direct without accusation. Sophia considered it honestly. Because people like you, wealthy, powerful people usually have an agenda, she finally said. My experience, nothing comes without strings attached, including our arrangement. Alexander asked quietly. Sophia looked away. Especially our arrangement. Alexander set down his mug and took a step closer to her. What if I told you I actually enjoyed being here today? That seeing Miguel's face when he realized what he could create with the right tools was more satisfying than closing my last billion-dollar deal. I'd say you're a better actor than I thought, Sophia replied. But there was no bite in her words. Or maybe, Alexander suggested, his voice dropping lower. You don't know me as well as you think you do. The air between them suddenly felt charged with something Sophia wasn't ready to acknowledge. She took a deliberate step back, creating distance. The wedding rehearsal is tomorrow night, she said, changing the subject. Eleanor sent a detailed schedule to my email. Apparently, I need to be at the manor by 4:00 for final dress fittings. Alexander accepted the conversational pivot gracefully. Grandmother loves nothing more than orchestrating elaborate events. Just smile and nod, and eventually she'll run out of instructions. Speaking from experience, Sophia asked with a small smile. 32 years of it, Alexander confirmed, returning her smile with one of his own. Not the polished version he used for cameras, but something more genuine that created small crinkles around his eyes. A comfortable silence fell between them, broken only when Javier appeared at the door. "Sophia, the after-school bus just arrived with the younger kids," he announced, glancing curiously between them. "Also, there are more reporters outside. Apparently, word got out about Mr. Sterling's community service day." "I should go," Alexander said, straightening his posture and seamlessly transitioning back into his public persona. "I have meetings this afternoon." "Of course," Sophia nodded, suddenly aware of how close they were standing. "Thank you for all of this." She gestured vaguely at the transformed computer lab visible through the doorway. Alexander's expression softened momentarily. "See you tomorrow at the rehearsal." "I'll be the one in white," Sophia joked weakly. After Alexander left, fielding questions from reporters with practiced ease as he made his way to the waiting car, Javier cornered Sophia in her office. "Okay, what was that?" he demanded. "What was what?" Sophia asked innocently, shuffling papers on her desk. That Javier gestured toward the kitchenette. "That moment with Mr. Moneybags. The one where you were looking at him like he hung the moon, and he was looking at you like a man fulfilling a business obligation." Sophia interrupted firmly. "Don't read into it, Javier. This is still just an arrangement. In a year, we'll go our separate ways, and the community center will have secure funding." "Uh-huh," Javier said skeptically. "And I'm Beyoncé." Sophia threw another pen at him, which he caught this time. "All I'm saying," he continued, his expression growing serious, "is be careful. The way he looks at you, that doesn't seem like acting to me." After Javier left, Sophia sat alone in her office, absently twisting the vintage emerald engagement ring on her finger. Outside, she could hear the happy chaos of children exploring the new technology Alexander had provided. "It's not real," she reminded herself firmly. "It's just a very convincing performance." But as she replayed the day's events in her mind, Alexander on the floor helping children with Lego robots, the genuine excitement in his voice as he explained the 3D printer to Miguel, the unguarded moment in the kitchenette when he'd suggested she didn't know him as well as she thought, Sophia couldn't silence the small voice in her heart, whispering that perhaps, just perhaps, some performances revealed more truth than fiction. Across town, Alexander sat in a board meeting, outwardly focused on quarterly projections while his mind repeatedly drifted to the community center, to Sophia's fierce dedication to her work, to the brief moment when her walls had come down and he'd glimpsed vulnerability beneath her strength. "Alexander," his grandmother's voice cut through his thoughts. "Do you agree with the proposal?" Alexander blinked, returning to the present. "I'm sorry. Could you repeat the question?" Eleanor Sterling raised an eyebrow, clearly aware her grandson's thoughts were elsewhere. The board was discussing the proposed merger with Westfield Technologies. "Right," Alexander said quickly, scanning the document in front of him. "I think we should hold off. Their cloud security infrastructure isn't up to our standards." As the discussion continued around him, Alexander found himself making a mental note to look into better funding for STEM programs at the community center. Miguel had real talent. With the right guidance, he could have a future at Sterling Deck. It was just good business, Alexander told himself. Investing in future talent, corporate social responsibility. It had nothing to do with the way Sophia's eyes had lit up when the children discovered what they could create with the new equipment. Nothing at all to do with the growing realization that his carefully constructed fake engagement was beginning to feel alarmingly real. The Sterling family estate glowed with thousands of twinkling lights, transforming the already impressive mansion into something out of a fairy tale. Inside the bridal suite, a room larger than Sophia's entire apartment, she stood before a full-length mirror, barely recognizing the woman who stared back at her. "You look beautiful, dear," Eleanor Sterling said, approaching with a vintage jewelry box. "Every bride should glow on her wedding day, even when the circumstances are unconventional." Sophia smoothed her hands over the simple but elegant gown Eleanor had helped her select. Unlike the elaborate princess dresses Sophia had vetoed, this one was understated, a sleek silhouette with delicate lace detailing that somehow made her look both sophisticated and ethereal. "Thank you for not forcing me into a mirroring," Sophia said with a small smile. Elena chuckled, opening the jewelry box to reveal a stunning sapphire and diamond necklace. A Sterling bride must look like herself, only elevated. Besides, Alexander would have hated seeing you uncomfortable. Sophia's heart gave an unexpected flutter at the mention of her soon-to-be husband. I doubt Alexander cares what I wear. Don't be so sure, Eleanor said cryptically, fastening the necklace around Sophia's neck. Something borrowed and blue. This has been in our family for generations. Sophia touched the sapphires gently. It's beautiful. Now, Eleanor said, stepping back to survey her work. Are you ready to marry my grandson? As ready as anyone can be for a fake marriage, Sophia replied, attempting humor to mask her confusion. Eleanor's eyes were knowing. Is it still fake, my dear? After everything these past 3 weeks, before Sophia could respond, there was a knock at the door. Javier peeked in, resplendent in his role as man of honor. It's time, he announced, then stopped short at the sight of her. Wow, Sophia, you look wow. Eloquent as always, Sophia teased, grateful for the interruption. She wasn't ready to examine the question Eleanor had posed. Wasn't ready to admit that somewhere between throwing a rock at Alexander's car and watching him patiently teach coding to underprivileged kids, something fundamental had shifted. The ceremony was intimate by sterling standards. Only 100 guests in the mansion's grand ballroom transformed into a garden oasis with cascading white flowers and strategically placed trees creating a forest-like atmosphere. As Sophia stood at the entrance, arm-linked with Javier's, her parents had passed away years ago. She caught her first glimpse of Alexander at the altar, her breath caught. He was devastatingly handsome in his tuxedo, his usually perfect hair slightly ruffled as if he'd been running his hands through it nervously. The thought of Alexander Sterling being nervous about anything was so unexpected that Sophia almost laughed. Then his eyes found hers and the rest of the room faded away. Something in his expression, a vulnerability she'd never seen before, made her heart race. For a moment, it was easy to forget this was all an elaborate performance. The ceremony itself passed in a blur. Sophia moved through it as if in a dream, speaking her vows with surprising steadiness, considering the turmoil in her heart. When Alexander slipped the wedding band onto her finger to join the vintage engagement ring, his hands trembled slightly, a detail so at odds with his usual confidence that Sophia found herself squeezing his fingers reassuringly. I now pronounce, do you husband and wife, the officiant declared, you may kiss the bride. This was the moment they hadn't rehearsed. During the practice session, Alexander had merely brushed his lips against her cheek, murmuring, we'll keep it simple tomorrow. But now, standing before their gathered guests, Alexander's eyes asked a silent question as he gently cuped her face. Sophia found herself nodding almost imperceptibly. The kiss was meant to be brief, a convincing but restrained display for their audience. Instead, the moment their lips met, something electric passed between them. Alexander's hand slid to her waist, drawing her closer as Sophia's fingers curled into the lapels of his jacket. For a few breathless seconds, the performance fell away, leaving only the undeniable truth they'd both been avoiding. When they finally separated, both slightly dazed, the guests erupted in applause. Sophia was vaguely aware of Eleanor dabbing at her eyes with a handkerchief, of Javier giving her a knowing look, but mostly she was aware of Alexander's hand, still firmly holding hers as if he was afraid to let go. The reception that followed was a masterpiece of elegant restraint, exactly what Sophia had requested when Eleanor had first broached the subject of wedding plans. In the garden behind the mansion, tables adorned with wild flowers and candles created an atmosphere of intimate celebration rather than ostentatious display. You've survived the hard part, Alexander murmured as they moved through their first dance, his hand warm against the small of her back. Only a few more hours of being Mr. Sterling for the day. Sophia looked up at him, studying the face that had become strangely dear to her in such a short time. Is it really so terrible being married to me? Something shifted in Alexander's expression, a flicker of emotion quickly masked. Not as terrible as I initially feared, he admitted with a small smile. You've only thrown one rock at me so far. The joke allowed them both to retreat from the dangerous territory they'd been approaching. Sophia laughed, and they continued their dance in companionable silence, each lost in private thoughts. Later, as Sophia was speaking with some of the children from the community center whom Eleanor had thoughtfully included on the guest list, she overheard a conversation that made her blood run cold. "Of course, it's a sham marriage," a man's voice said from behind a nearby pillar. "Alexander needs control of the company before his birthday, and this community center woman was convenient. I give it 6 months before they quietly divorce." "Richard, you're just bitter because you thought you'd get the CEO position," a woman replied. "Besides, did you see how he looks at her? That's not faking." "Please, the man, Richard," Alexander's cousin, scoffed. "Alexander Sterling doesn't fall in love. He makes strategic alliances. This marriage is just business, a means to an end." Sophia's chest tightened painfully. Of course, it was business. That had been the arrangement from the beginning. So why did Richard's words hurt so much? She excused herself from the children and sought refuge on a secluded terrace, needing a moment alone to compose herself. The night air was cool against her flushed skin as she braced her hands against the stone balustrade, taking deep breaths. "Hiding from your own wedding reception?" Alexander's voice came from behind her. Sophia straightened, but didn't turn. Just needed some air. Alexander moved to stand beside her, his shoulder almost touching hers as they both gazed out at the illuminated gardens. "Is everything all right? You look upset." "I overheard your cousin, Richard," Sophia admitted. "He was quite clear about what he thinks of our arrangement." Alexander's jaw tightened. "Richard has always been jealous. Ignore him." "But he's not wrong, is he?" Sophia pressed, finally turning to face him. "This is just business, a means to an end." That was the deal. Something flickered in Alexander's eyes, something that looked almost like pain. "Is that still how you see it?" The question hung between them, laden with unspoken implications. Sophia's heart hammered against her ribs as she searched for an answer that wouldn't leave her vulnerable. Before she could respond, Graves appeared at the terrace entrance. "Mr. Sterling, your grandmother requests your presence for the cake cutting." Alexander hesitated, clearly reluctant to leave their conversation unfinished. "We'll be right there, Graves." When they were alone again, Alexander took Sophia's hand, his touch unexpectedly gentle. "We should go back, but this conversation isn't over." The remainder of the reception passed in a blur of cake cutting, champagne toasts, and carefully orchestrated photo opportunities. Through it all, Sophia was acutely aware of Alexander's gaze following her, of the question that remained unanswered between them. Finally, as the last guests departed and the staff began the cleanup process, Eleanor approached the newlyweds with a satisfied smile. "A perfect day," she declared, kissing them both on the cheek. "Now I've had the blue guest suite prepared for Sophia and Alexander. Your usual room is ready, unless, of course, you prefer different arrangements." The implication was clear, and Sophia felt heat rise to her cheeks. "The blue suite will be fine, thank you," she said quickly. Alexander's expression was unreadable. "Grandmother, could you give us a moment?" Eleanor's eyes twinkled knowingly. "Of course, dear. Good night to you both." When they were alone in the grand foyer, an awkward silence fell between them. Sophia was suddenly acutely aware that they were now legally married, standing in what was technically their home with a wedding night stretching before them. "I should probably get changed," she said, gesturing vaguely to her wedding gown. "Sophia," Alexander said softly, stopping her retreat. "About what Richard said." "It's fine," she interrupted. "He was just stating the obvious. This is a business arrangement. We both know that." Alexander took a step closer, his eyes searching hers. "Do we?" "Because I'm not sure I know anything anymore." Sophia's heart skipped a beat. "What do you mean?" "I mean," Alexander said carefully, "that when I agreed to this arrangement, I thought it would be simple, straightforward, a year of pretending, and then we both get what we want and go our separate ways." "And now?" Sophia asked, barely breathing. Alexander ran a hand through his hair in that now familiar gesture of genuine agitation. "Now I'm standing here on my wedding night, looking at my wife and realizing that somewhere along the way, this stopped being pretend for me." The confession hung in the air between them, breathtaking in its vulnerability coming from a man who had built his life around carefully controlled perceptions. "Alexander," Sophia began, not sure what she was going to say. "You don't have to say anything," he cut in quickly. "I know this wasn't part of our deal. I know you have plans for after our year is up. I'm not asking for anything to change. I couldn't let Richard's words stand unchallenged. Not tonight. He turned to go and something broke loose in Sophia's chest. A truth she'd been fighting for weeks. Wait, she called, moving toward him. What if? What if I don't want to pretend anymore either? Alexander froze, then slowly turned back to face her, hope and weariness wearing in his expression. What are you saying? Sophia took a deep breath, gathering her courage. I'm saying that I threw a rock at your car because you were everything I despised about privilege and entitlement. But then I watched you sit on the floor helping kids with homework. I saw how you listened to Miguel talk about coding with genuine interest. I noticed how you remember everyone's names at the center and how you never make them feel like charity cases. She took another step closer. I'm saying that somewhere between hating you and marrying you, I started to see the real Alexander Sterling. And I think I might be falling in love with him. For a moment, Alexander stood perfectly still as if afraid any movement might shatter the moment. Then, with a reverence that took Sophia's breath away, he cradled her face in his hands. I've spent my whole life playing roles, he said softly. The brilliant tech genius, the charming playboy, the ruthless businessman. It was easier than letting anyone see the real me. But you threw a rock at my car and demanded the truth. And somehow that was the most liberating moment of my life. Sophia laughed through the tears that had unexpectedly filled her eyes. That strange way to meet the love of your life. The love of my life, Alexander repeated wonderingly. Is that what you are, Sophia Menddees Sterling? In answer, Sophia rose on her tiptoes and pressed her lips to his, not for cameras or wedding guests or appearances, but for themselves alone. This kiss was different from their first, deeper, more certain, filled with promise rather than question. When they finally separated, Alexander rested his forehead against hers. So, what happens now? Our agreement was for 1 year. I think, Sophia interrupted with a smile, that we need to renegotiate our terms. As a businessman, I'm open to that, Alexander teased, his arms encircling her waist. What did you have in mind? Well, Sophia pretended to consider the community center still gets its funding. You still get the company, but instead of divorcing in a year, we actually try this marriage thing for real, Alexander suggested, a smile spreading across his face. Sophia nodded with one additional condition. Name it. You continue volunteering at the center, Sophia said. The kids adore you, and it turns out you're surprisingly good at it. Alexander laughed, a free, genuine sound that Sophia had grown to love. I think that can be arranged. Anything else? Sophia's expression turned serious. Just one thing. Promise me we'll always be honest with each other. No more pretending, no more roles. I promise, Alexander said solemnly, sealing his vow with another kiss. From the shadows of the grand staircase, Eleanor Sterling watched the scene unfold with a satisfied smile. Her plan had worked even better than she'd hoped. Not only would the company remain in capable hands, but her grandson had finally found someone who saw him for who he truly was and loved him anyway. Mission accomplished, she murmured to herself, quietly retreating to her rooms to give the newlyweds their privacy. In the years that followed, the story of how Sophia and Alexander Sterling met became something of a legend in their social circles. The rock-throwing incident, immortalized by several witnesses with smartphone cameras, was a favorite anecdote at dinner parties and charity galas. The West Side Community Center flourished under Sophia's continued leadership and Alexander's technological contributions, eventually expanding to 3 locations across the city. Miguel, the teenager who had impressed Alexander with his coding abilities, became the first recipient of the Sterling Tech Scholarship, later joining the company as a software engineer after graduating from MIT. As for Eleanor Sterling, she lived to the ripe old age of 96, doing on her 3 great-grandchildren and occasionally reminding Sophia and Alexander that they had her to thank for their happiness. After all, she would say with a twinkle in her eye, it takes a certain kind of woman to throw a rock at a man's car and still end up with his heart. I knew immediately you were the one for my impossible grandson. And Sophia, looking across at Alexander, who had long since proven himself to be nothing like the arrogant millionaire she'd first encountered, would smile and agree that sometimes the most unexpected beginnings led to the most beautiful love stories. even if they did start with a rock in a dented car door.